The modern social corral operates under a devastating, deeply unexamined delusion: the belief in pure technological altruism. The contemporary individual is continuously bombarded with a curated flood of digital virtue videos of calculated generosity, public declarations of grief for distant tragedies, and manufactured crusades for collective healing. Society brands this relentless display as empathy, awareness, and higher consciousness. But if one peels back the thin layer of sentimental marketing and observes the dynamic with cold, clinical detachment, the fraud is instantly exposed. The modern display of compassion is not an act of love. It is an investment in social currency, a low-cost lease on moral superiority, and the most effective shield that ego can buy to hide its own structural emptiness. Arthur Schopenhauer recognized that human nature is governed primarily by an uncompromising egoism, a fierce, subterranean drive to preserve the self and validate one's own positioning at all costs. True compassion is an exceedingly rare anomaly, a profound breakthrough that requires the total dissolution of individual vanity. The contemporary digital apparatus has done the exact opposite. It has industrialized the simulation of virtue. It has turned empathy into a performative sport where the suffering of others is treated as raw material to be processed into personal metrics. Today, we dismantle the religion of public benevolence, exposing how your expectation of collective empathy is a psychological trap designed to keep you submissive to a herd that uses virtue as a weapon of domestic control. The individual who conditions their worldview on the apparent kindness of the crowd is routinely bankrupted by reality. They watch the most vocal moralists on the screen practice systemic malice in their private architectures, and they mistake the collective noise of a social cause for a genuine elevation of the human spirit. They fail to understand that the herd does not congregate to heal. The herd congregates to feel powerful. The public tear, the shared hashtag, and the recorded donation are merely synthetic pellets of moral validation designed to quiet a restless conscience. True sovereignty does not participate in the auction of empty virtues. It begins when the mind detaches completely from the theater of the good and embraces the cold clarity of human reality. To understand the absolute fraud of modern empathy, the mind must first analyze the mechanism of its documentation. In any era prior to the digital panopticon, an act of benevolence was a private transactioner, silent alignment of character that required no witness to validate its reality. Today, an undocumented act of kindness is viewed by the herd as a wasted asset. The modern altruist does not merely give, they curate the giving. They position the camera, adjust the lighting, and ensure the recipient's degradation is perfectly captured in high definition, entirely to maximize the emotional return on their investment. This is not compassion. It is the consumerism of the soul. The modern do-gooder is essentially a psychological predator, feeding on the vulnerability of the broken to buy the applause of the bored. Schopenhauer observed that vanity is the constant companion of ignorance, and the digital space has given this vanity a global marketplace. When an individual broadcasts their philanthropy, they are not attempting to alleviate suffering. They are attempting to purchase an identity. They need the crowd to look at their profile and whisper, "See how good they are." This external echo is the only mechanism that allows them to pretend. They are not completely vacant within. The system requires this constant manufacturing of virtue. A society that is permanently engaged in performative empathy is a society that never analyzes structural oppression. It allows the corporate entity, the politician, and the digital influencer to buy a clean reputation through a single public relations campaign, while their actual operations continue to extract the vital energy of the masses. The herd actively defends this simulation, screaming that at least they are doing something. They fail to see that the something being done is the absolute pacification of the individual intellect. The sovereign mind looks past the polished smile of the philanthropist and recognizes that the grandest monuments of public virtue are almost always built on a foundation of unpunished malice. Let us observe the more sinister devolution of this dynamic, the weaponization of empathy. The digital herd has discovered that the language of compassion is the most effective tool for exercising absolute, unchecked dominance over the individual. Under the guise of protecting the vulnerable or standing for justice, the crowd consensus constructs an oppressive moral monopoly. Anyone who refuses to repeat the collective slogans, anyone who analyzes the situation with critical detachment, is immediately branded as cold, heartless, or dangerous. This is the supreme comedy of the modern moralist. They claim to speak for empathy, yet their methods are entirely sadistic. They track down the independent thinker, orchestrate modern public execution through online cancellation, and destroy livelihoods with a terrifying absolute certainty of their own righteousness. They do not hate the sin, they love the hunt. The social cause is merely the flag they wave to justify the primitive, animalistic impulse to tear a lone wolf to pieces. It is the revenge of the mediocre mind, using the collective conscience as an untraceable weapon to pull down anyone who stands taller than the rest. Schopenhauer was under no illusions about the collective moral capacity of the masses. He knew that the morality of the herd is governed entirely by fear, fear of the law, fear of ostracism, and fear of losing status. When the crowd screams for empathy, they are not practicing virtue. They are enforcing compliance. They need everyone to wear the same mask of false concern so that no one's actual selfishness is exposed. The individual who begs for mercy or validation from this moral tribunal has already surrendered their autonomy. They have allowed a committee of cowards to dictate the boundaries of their internal peace. There is a silent, unceasing transaction of psychological laundering occurring behind every digital crusade. The modern individual lives in a permanent state of subconscious guilt, the guilt of absolute comfort in a world of absolute horror, the guilt of absolute conformity in a system of total exploitation. They know, at a subterranean level, that their entire lifestyle is financed by the degradation of someone else. To tolerate this cognitive dissonance without losing their mind, they require a mechanism to wash their conscience. Performative empathy is that mechanism. The shared post, the public outrage, and the microdonation are essentially the modern version of papal privileges. The individual drops a coin into the digital collection plate, buys their absolution for the day, and returns to their comfortable routine entirely unchanged. They didn't solve a tragedy, they merely rented an emotion. This emotional tourism allows the masses to feel like historical actors without ever making a real sacrifice. They mistake the temporary spike of dopamine caused by their public alignment with virtue for actual character. It is a profound, automated form of self-delusion. This laundering of guilt creates a highly toxic psychological dependence. The performative empath requires a permanent supply of victims, tragedies, and injustices to keep their internal furnace running. If the world were to become peaceful and fair tomorrow, their moral identity would completely collapse. They would have no canvas left to paint their beautiful reflection upon. Therefore, they do not seek solutions, they seek narratives. They marinate in the misery of the world, transforming the trauma of others into a curated aesthetic for their personal consumption. To allow your own mind to be pulled into this cycle of manufactured grief is to trade your sovereign stability for a place in a parade of ghosts. Let us strip away the theatrical script of the good citizen and analyze the raw, biological architecture of human interaction. Schopenhauer observed that when the immediate pressure of necessity or social constraint is removed, human beings look at one another with an underlying coldness that borders on hostility. The natural state of the ego is isolation, and every bridge thrown toward another is held up by the pillars of self-interest, convenience, or genetic preservation. The myth of universal empathy suggests that we are all mystically connected and that your pain is genuinely felt by the stranger next to you. This is an organic impossibility. The nervous system is entirely individual. The skull is a solitary fortress. When a tragedy strikes your house, the world does not stop. The neighbor might offer a polite script of condolence, but within minutes, their mind returns to their own bills, their own desires, and their own trivial comforts. They do not carry your weight. They merely observe it from a safe, comfortable distance. To expect anything more from human nature is a critical error in calculation. When you fully accept this structural isolation, the need for public empathy completely dies. You no longer search for validation from a digital crowd that changes its moral priorities with every turn of the trend cycle. You stop participating in the mutual simulation of care, where people pretend to listen while they are actually just waiting for their turn to speak or be praised. The sovereign mind practices an honest, glacial realism. It expects nothing from the crowd, demands no sympathy from the environment, and relies entirely on its own internal resources to navigate the storm. This detachment is not cruelty. It is the ultimate form of respect for reality. True strength is born at the exact moment the theatrical mask of the world is completely discarded and the individual embraces an absolute clinical detachment. When you look at the moral crusades of the herd and feel an absolute indifference, the system loses its primary lever of emotional blackmail. They can no longer shame you, they can no longer manipulate your guilt, and they can no longer force your intellect to bow before their collective idols. This is the construction of the sovereign armor. The enlightened individual does not perform virtue to buy the applause of the machine, nor do they seek the title of the good person from an audience of hypocrites. If they choose to assist an individual in the dirt, they do it in total secrecy, leaving no digital record, demanding no gratitude, and treating the act as a private decree of their own character, never as a transaction for social currency. They understand that true integrity is always invisible to the crowd. Stand firm in the cold clarity of your own autonomy. Refuse to let the digital panopticon dictate what you should fear, what you should love, or what cause you should weep for today. If the condition for your acceptance into the social circle is the participation in their collective theater of false empathy, the price is an insult to your intellect. The sovereign mind operates as an independent observer, watching the performance from the margins, content in its own self-sufficiency, entirely unbothered by the moral policing of the day. They have discovered that the ultimate power is to be entirely immune to the emotional contagions of the rebacco. The theater of the good is empty. The porcelain masks have turned to dust. The unwritten contract that demanded your compliance in exchange for a certificate of moral decency was a systemic forgery, designed by a fearful herd to keep the individual from escaping the corral. Let the masses continue to weep for the cameras, trading their pixels of virtue for fractions of attention. You have seen behind the curtain. There is no cosmic validation in public empathy. There is no truth in the performance of the crowd. There is only the clean, silent path of the individual who has chosen his own cold sanctuary over a warm, hypocritical cage. The shadow does not require an applause. It simply abides in its own quiet reality. Welcome to the final demolition of your moral illusions. Welcome back to your own independent kingdom. If you have escaped the teeter of false empathy, leave your mark in the comments. Subscribe to defend your sovereignty in the shadow.